Good morning, everybody. It's truly great to be here today, being at FSS live. Today we're still streaming everything online. There's nobody here with me today. But as a reminder that tomorrow our plan is to reopen FSS. Tomorrow being Monday, September 13th, 2021. And we'll be reopening for our public meetings that we have on Mondays and Sundays. As a reminder to everybody, we will not be offering temporarily the Spiritist education for children on Sundays. We used to offer that prior to the pandemic, but upon our return, starting tomorrow, we won't be offering those for the time being. Whenever we reinstate that, we will let all the parents and everybody know. With also following provincial guidelines, we would like to kindly ask you to bring and wear a mask while here. The person speaking, like myself, we're the only ones who don't, we're not recommended to wear a mask because we're speaking, but if you do come tomorrow, we'd like to please ask you to bring your mask and wear a mask. We do have masks available here if you forget yours. And again, following recommendations from the province, we would like to, for unvaccinated people, that they're strongly recommended to stay home and watch our public meetings online, and rest assured that you'll be in our hearts as well. We'll all be together. So hope to see some of you tomorrow for our reopening. We'll start at 7 o'clock, just like we used to, and we still do. And it'll be the public meeting from 7 to 7:45-ish, and then we'll be doing our passes afterwards, and that will be it for the day. So yeah, hope to see you all tomorrow. And as a starting point today, we'll be reading a book just to bring ourselves to a more meditative and comfortable state. We'll be bringing some words from the Spirit Manual, from the book The Way, the Truth, and the Life. And it's chapter 8, entitled Jesus Came. And Emmanuel is interpreting a passage from Paul to the Philippians, chapter 2, verse 7, when Paul said, "But he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, making himself similar to men." And Emmanuel brings a wealth of knowledge when he says that many disciples talk about how terribly hard it is to do good works in the service of evangelical fellowship. They complain about the unfortunate state of ignorance that most people seem to enjoy. However, complaints like this are unjustified. In carrying out his divine mission of love, Jesus did not depend on the immediate collaboration of perfected and wise spirits. Instead, he emptied himself, taking the form of a servant, making himself similar to men. We were not able to go up to the Savior to be with him in his sublime position. Instead, he came down to us, temporarily extinguishing his aureole of light in order to benefit us without displays of sensationalism. Jesus' examples in this particular is a highly profound lesson. Let no one allege intellectual or sentimental accomplishments as a reason for their brothers and sisters misunderstanding them. None of those who have walked the earth ever reached the heights of Christ. On the other hand, we see him eating with sinners, talking fraternally to prostitutes, and giving him final example between two thieves. If your neighbor cannot reach your spiritual level, then you can go to his or hers for the good work of fraternity and enlightenment without any ostentation that might be offensive. Remember the example of the Divine Master. In order to come to us, he emptied himself, entering the world as a child with no cradle, and exiting his glorious endeavor as a crucified servant. So now let us close our eyes as we embark in prayer. Letting our thoughts be together with Jesus, with our Master, with our guide who came from so high above, who emptied himself, who came as a baby without a cradle, who talked to everybody regardless of their background, regardless of what they had done, and who left the earth crucified. He, the most pure spirit, to come to earth. In this moment, thanking him for coming, thanking him for being here with us today. We, after thanking him, would like to ask him to help us be inspired by his love, inspired by his moral examples, so his words can touch our hearts, can inspire us one more time when we ask our Father to give us the strength that we need to reflect upon Jesus' words, to understand it, to bring it to our hearts, and to exercise it with our mind, with our soul, with our hands, with our smiles, with our walk. Thank you, Jesus, for again another opportunity to talk about you, with you, and to feel you. May your light guide us today and tomorrow, forever and ever. So be it. So thank you again for being here. Welcome, Anna. And we'd like to invite you all to post comments, questions, whatever it is that might come to your mind on our YouTube or Facebook channels. We constantly monitor those so we can make the most out of this online experience. So today, as we've mentioned before, we'll be talking about Spiritist Conscience. Have I been applying Jesus' teachings in my life? And this talk is heavily based, it's fully based on a seminar given by Lidio Sequeira Filho and Afro Stefanini Segundo. These are two Spiritist workers, and a few years ago they made a seminar called Spiritist Conscience at the Federation of the Spiritist Federation of the state of Mato Grosso in Brazil. And they based it on the Gospel of Matthew and John, and also the Gospel according to Spiritism by Allan Kardec. And the reason why we chose to bring this topic again, because actually I gave this talk back in 2019, around August. I chose to bring this one back because tomorrow we'll be reopening. So this talk talks a little bit about, it starts with focusing on Spiritism, basically going back to the basics, talking a little bit about Spiritism, and then moving on to talk about the immortal spirit, and then ending with a passage or parable from Christ, so that we can reflect a little bit more about our relationships with other people, and how we are able to enjoy all the mercy that God gives us constantly. So as a starting point to start reflecting a little bit about Jesus, a couple questions, and the first one being, what does Spiritism mean to me? Perhaps you can think, when did I become a Spiritist? How has it changed my life? How has it changed my life today? Since I woke up today until I'm here right now, how has Spiritism helped me through this morning? Have I exercised a little bit of love towards others? Have I exercised a little bit of self-love towards myself, obviously, this morning? And the second one is, do I feel myself as an immortal spirit? So here's where we'll be talking about the perspective of our actions when we see ourselves as immortal spirits. So, first of all is, do I feel myself as an immortal spirit? And if I do, what does that mean for the experiences that I go through life? And the third one is, am I bringing the law of love, justice, and charity into my life? The law of love, justice, and charity is what we'll be talking about today quite extensively towards the second half of our talk, to utilize and to start reflecting upon the biggest, the overarching law that God has given us, which is the law of love, justice, and charity. So, to start off with the reflections about Spiritism, it's always good to bring the understanding about the movement and the doctrine, make the distinction. And this means that we're truly going back to the basics. What is the distinction? Can you answer in our minds, or even write it on our chat? What is the difference between the Spiritist movement and the Spiritist doctrine? And why is it important to make this distinction? Well, the doctrine is the promised consoler, as Jesus promised to us in John, which is what the spirits revealed to us, starting with the books from Kardec, all of these 5, and a few more. And then also all the truthful Spiritist books that we have from many mediums, from many Spiritists, since Kardec, Leon Denis, Ivone Amaral Pereira do Amaral, Chico Xavier, Givaldo Pereira Franco. We have many examples. These all collectively build this doctrine, which come to help us understand the divine laws, help us reflect about the divine laws. And these are, like we've talked about before, immutable. Right? The doctrine itself is what is divine. The movement, the Spiritist movement, is what we make out of that doctrine. How do we interpret it? Right? And the movement is what we're responsible for. So if the movement moves astray from the doctrine, that is on us, because it is our lack of understanding of the doctrine that leads us astray. We can the example that we can bring is, for example, we're talking to somebody who's a Spiritist, for example, and we see them act in a way that is not loving. And if I'm somebody who's just being introduced to Spiritism, I might think, well, Spiritism is not a loving religion, so I'm not going to follow it. And that's where the distinction between the movement and the doctrine lies, is understanding that that person, their actions and reactions, that belongs to the movement, that belongs to his or her interpretation of the doctrine. But the doctrine itself is filled with love, justice, and charity. You can see in every sentence, like especially the one that the text that we read today about Jesus is coming to our lives. The doctrine itself is fulfilled with love, justice, and charity. Whatever that moves away from that, that's on the movement, that's on men, that's on us right here, right now, and our interpretation of it. And the reason why we study so much, we reflect so much, is because we're trying to take the movement and move it closer and closer and closer to the doctrine. And as an example, when we think about the purpose of Spiritism, we say that Spiritism is the promised consoler, like Christ promised us in John. And the purpose of Spiritism is to relive Christianity from its beginnings. From when Christ came in a few hundred years after. That is the purpose of Spiritism, is to remind ourselves of everything that we might have forgotten, or that we might have, in the past, chosen to ignore. And not only does it remind us about the true Christianity, but it also gives us other revelations. It gives us other tools to help us understand it. So we no longer have to turn a blind eye to things, but we can understand, we can think, we can utilize our thoughts to also embrace religion, to also embrace philosophy, and also embrace science without having to turn a blind eye to any of them. And in doing so, be able to harmonize ourselves and the world. So that is the main purpose of Spiritism, as we are going back to the basics. And then the science, that's an aspect of Spiritism that truly interests myself, and I'm sure many others. But if we look at science itself, it tries to go deep into a subject. It tries to depict, try to unfold and understand and find out in a reasonable way how things occur, how things happen, why things are the way they are. So Spiritism is a science as well, because it has this purpose of studying the immortal spirit. And in doing so, in studying the immortal spirit over and over again, it can utilize proof, it can utilize things that happen around the world to prove that the immortal spirit does exist, that we are immortal spirits. So in that sense, it's also a science, because, again, we can utilize proof to understand it. And the same way that we can see science as the study of the physical laws, we can see Spiritism as the study of the moral laws. So much so that we brought the law of love, charity, and justice, and we will be talking a little bit about it. Because again, we're trying to bring this understanding, this study on the morals. And in doing so, we can see how eventually science will converge into our moral laws and be able to complement each other and not fight against each other. And then the last one is the legacy. What is the legacy of Spiritism today? Afro, who made who partly made this seminar, he describes this as the era that we're living right now in the Spiritist movement, with the beginning being more of the physical phenomena which dominated time. As an example, we would have the banging walls, the rotating tables, and so on and so forth, marking the physical to basically call our attention to it. That moved us more to the writing phenomena, where we were able to extract some of the teachings of Spiritism, especially through those books from Kardec back in the 19th century. And that flourished the understanding of Spiritism and got the curiosity from some people. But with these teachings, they were able to move beyond curiosity and actually start to practice in their lives. And that brought us to the intellectual phase of Spiritism, which happened in the past 100 years, 120 years, where we went from having 5 main books on Spiritism, but also having other books from Kardec, to having more than 1,000 books talking about Spiritism. So we could call it the intellectual era of Spiritism, where more and more information, more knowledge was being poured out for us, allowing us to be here now. What we call it the 4th era of Spiritism, which is the moral era. So the intellectual era, their legacy was all the books. The 4th era, the moral era, the legacy now is us. We will be the legacy of Spiritism, being how much could we utilize all this intellectual knowledge that is available out there to bring it to ourselves and evolve ourselves morally. Our moral evolution will be the legacy of Spiritism from now on, through always our self-love, our self-respect, and the study of the immortal spirit. So this brings us to reflect a little bit about the immortal spirit, especially around our actions today. And Alidio likes to divide those actions between the circumstantial actions and the existential actions. And for us to understand what they are, they help us understand how to behave. They help us understand how to focus our time, how to improve the quality of our time on earth. So circumstantial actions being the actions that we do on a regular basis. For example, being here talking. This is a circumstantial action. Going to work is a circumstantial action. Watering a plant is a circumstantial action. Everything. Most things that we do is a circumstantial action. And what characterizes it is that a circumstantial action is transitory and transferable. Anybody could be here talking. Anybody could water this plant. Anybody could do my job at work. We can find somebody else to do it. So circumstantial actions, they are transferable. And they are the tools, they are the experiences that provides us the opportunity to evolve our immortal spirit, unlocking what we call the existential actions. These existential actions, they are everything that relate to the immortal spirit. They are the result of a circumstantial action. So being here, for example, me, myself today speaking, this is a circumstantial action, but what is that doing to my immortal spirit? Am I learning something new today by being here? Am I connecting with myself a little bit more? Am I exercising my self-love? Am I connecting with Christ? All those things, they are existential actions, because those will shape, mold my immortal spirit. And the sole characteristic of an existential action is that it is individual and untransferable. There is one thing that nobody can do for me, and that is improve myself, evolve my moral compass, my moral actions. Nobody can do that for me. And that's why it's individual and untransferable. And it is what will evolve our immortal spirit. Right? It's having, for example, all these books here, reading all these books, having all the knowledge, memorizing all the chapters. That is a circumstantial action. But bringing all this knowledge into me, into my heart, into my behavior, into my morals, that is an existential action, because that is truly impacting, molding, shaping my immortal spirit. And nobody else can do that for us. We try. Trust me, we certainly try. But only us can do that for us. A simple way to describe that is that sentence that a lot of us use it on a daily basis, is the means to an end, where the means are our circumstantial actions. And the end is our existential purpose. Our existential meaning that moral improvement, right? That improvement of our immortal spirit. So everything that we do can be a means to an end. Every action that we take, every experience that we go through is part of God's mercy. How we utilize those actions, that is up to us. Because again, nobody can do that for us. And to link this with the law of love, justice, and charity, we can actually, before that, how can we think about a divine law, for example? The law of love, justice, and charity. It's a really nice way to make an analogy to see how the laws work. For example, being here, talking today, I could just be talking. But while I'm talking, while I'm studying to be here, if I'm applying the law of love in my action, I will also be transforming it into an existential action. So we can see a divine law as something that takes a circumstantial action and transforms it into an existential action. So by bringing the divine laws into our lives, by bringing the divine laws into our actions, we will, as a consequence, be improving our immortal spirit, our morals, which is the legacy that we will be leaving for Spiritism nowadays, is how much we have changed, morally speaking. And starting to talk about the law of love, justice, and charity, the first one being love. And there are many passages from the Gospel, especially from Matthew, that talk about love and describe love in a way that can be understood quite well. For example, in Matthew 22nd, he says, love God as your neighbor. Love God and your neighbor as yourself, right? And if we were to reflect a little bit about this, the word yourself is at the very end. And the interesting part of this is that comes first. Loving myself comes first. And the sole purpose of this, the sole reason for loving myself comes first, is something that we always talk about this. At least once a month you will hear this sentence here at FSS, is that we can't give something that we don't have. So if I don't practice love towards myself, I can't give it out because I don't have it. I can certainly try. I can certainly fake it, but it won't be true. And Joanna D'Angelis, when in the book Love, Unbeatable Love, she describes beautifully love. And one of the things that she mentions is that love is something that can be practiced. It's not something that we're simply born with it. It's something that we practice. It's like a muscle that we exercise. A lot of times we see somebody, that is born with the ability to love. We look at some people and we see, wow, they simply love everything. How is that possible? Well, they still practiced in their previous lives. So it's not like they were born with it, but they practiced. They worked with it, and they developed this ability to love. And so in loving ourselves, we start to develop the love for us, and then we start to develop the love towards God. And as a consequence, we start to developing love towards others. It's really interesting how loving our neighbor it's almost an automatic consequence of loving ourselves and loving the divine laws. When we love ourselves and love the divine laws, we will automatically love others. It won't have to be something tough that we do. It'll just happen. And how can we practice self-love then? What does self-love even mean? We can always reflect about that. And there are many definitions, if you will, of self-love and how to practice it. Sometimes we think that self-love is taking a day off for myself, right, and just pampering myself for the entire day. That could be it. But the interesting point is that self-love does not require us to be alone and pampering ourselves. Self-love can be practiced at every single moment in our lives, be it at work, be it doing charity, be it with ourselves on a day off, pampering ourselves. It can be done at every single time. Because in my perspective, and this is something that a leader brings to us, is that self-love is practiced by utilizing our time to learn about the divine laws and apply the divine laws in our lives by developing virtues. So every time I'm developing a virtue, I am loving myself. Isn't that nice? So, for example, if I'm at work and I'm being mindful of somebody that is nervous and I'm helping them out, that can be an act of self-love because I'm developing the virtue of altruism. I'm developing the virtue of compassion. And in doing so, I'm developing my self-love. If I am at home praying or reading a Spiritist book and having that teaching fully understood and applying that into my life, reflecting what parts of my life could be impacted by this new teaching that I just had, that can be practice of self-love. Every time that we're truly developing a virtue, focus on the word truly. So I'm not pretending to develop a virtue, but I'm truly developing a virtue, that is an act of self-love. So that can be done at any time, in any circumstance. Because again, everything that we go through in life is God's mercy. And in God's mercy, love is the fuel. Love is what's driving it. So if we're able to extract love in everything that we do, we will be practicing self-love as a result. And so that is a bit of a description on love. And to talk a little bit about charity, if we look at the Spirit's book, when Kardec asks, what is the true meaning of the word charity as seen by Jesus, as taught by Jesus? And the answer are three virtues, or three behaviors, which are benevolence, indulgence, and forgiveness. So we'll be using a text from the Gospel according to Spiritism entitled The Good Person to describe a little bit about indulgence. We won't be talking about benevolence or forgiveness, but we'll be talking a little bit about indulgence when they say that the good person is indulgent with the weakness of others because they know that they also need indulgence, remembering that Christ said, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And in times like these, where we see a lot of polarization, a lot of blaming, a lot of pointing the weakness on others around us, and including myself, not taking myself out of this, it's truly a huge opportunity for us to practice indulgence. Remembering that we ourselves also have our own faults. And we ourselves are also deserving of indulgence of others. And to exemplify this is when Christ, in that very famous passage in John, when he says, "Let he who is without sin cast the first stone." And look how indulgent Christ was. He wasn't blaming others. He was just inviting them for a reflection, where people were invited to reflect about the things that they did first, as opposed to start looking at the weaknesses of others and utilizing that weakness as a reason to stone them. So the reflection, this invitation from Christ, can be applied every day of our lives. Every time we have an aggressive discussion with somebody, sometimes I don't even have to voice it. Sometimes it's just thoughts, sometimes it's just feelings towards others. Ask ourselves, how about me? How about my weaknesses? And where should I be working, as opposed to focusing on the weakness of others and utilizing those as conduits for rage, for hate, and so many other feelings. And the second part of this text is, they do not take pleasure in looking for defects in others, nor in calling attention to them. And if necessity obliges them to do so, they always try to look for the good qualities so as to lessen the bad ones. This is an act of indulgence. This is part of what it is to be a good person, is not to take pleasure in looking at the defects of others. And this is something that our ego does it so well. When we're feeling down, a lot of times we will look at the defects of others so we can feel better, so our ego can feel better. But the indulgent person, who is exercising self-love, who is transforming their ego, starts to no longer take pleasure in looking at defects of others, nor calling the attention to them. And if they have to do so, because at times we we might have to talk to somebody and bring the defect that they might have, they always try to do it in a very loving and caring way. So this is a good description about charity that we can see in the Gospel according to Spiritism. And we still have 20 minutes. And now, to exemplify a little bit of justice and charity, we'd like to end with a parable from Christ called The Workers in the Vineyard. And this is a fairly well-known parable, and we've already talked about this before here. But it's always good to remind ourselves a little bit about the parables of Christ. And I will read this passage, this parable, and then we'll look at the symbolism and see how does that apply to my life. Asking ourselves that question. How does that apply to my life? So it goes like this. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. He agreed to pay them a denarius for the day and sent them to his vineyard. About 9 in the morning, he went out and saw others standing in the marketplace doing nothing. He told them, "You also go and work in my vineyard, and I will pay you whatever is right." So they went. He went out again about noon and about 3 in the afternoon and did the same thing. About 5 in the afternoon, he went out and found still others standing around. He asked them, "Why have you been standing here all day long, doing nothing?" And they answered, "Because no one has hired us." So he said to them, "You also go and work in my vineyard." When the evening came, the owner of the vineyard said to his foreman, "Call the workers and pay them their wages, beginning with the last ones hired and going to the first." The workers who were hired about 5 in the afternoon came and each received a denarius. So when those came who were hired first, they expected to receive more. But each of them also received a denarius. When they received it, they began to grumble against the landowner. These who were hired last worked only 1 hour. They said, "And you have made them equal to us, who have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day?" But the landowner answered, "I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. I want to give the one who has hired last the same as I gave you. Don't I have the right to do what I want with my own money? Or are you envious because I am generous?" So the last will be first, and the first will be last. There's certainly a lot of things, a lot of teachings that we can extract from this passage, and it's amazing how current it still is. Almost 2,000 years after it, it's still so current, and we still have so much to learn from it and apply in our lives. A lot of times we already know. A lot of times we already understood somewhat of this passage, but we haven't felt it yet. We haven't been able to apply it in our lives as much as we would like. So, hopefully, with a little bit of reflection today, we can take it a little bit deeper. And when Alidu came to Canada a couple of years ago to talk about this parable, we spent 2.5 days talking about it. So in 15 minutes, I'm not going to be able to get that deep, but hopefully it can spark some topics of reflection for you at home and for us. So just to bring a little bit of the symbolism for this interpretation that we're making of the talk, of the parable. The kingdom of heaven and the landowner and the vineyard. So what are those here? The vineyard is the immortal spirit. The vineyard is us. it's our immortal spirit. So when we're working in the vineyard, that means us working with ourselves, working in our moral development. Then the landowner, that would be God. The landowner being the ones who give us the opportunity to work. And the kingdom of heaven, that is our active work. So for the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers in his vineyard. So God constantly invites us to work within ourselves, to work in our vineyard, no matter what time it is. He's always inviting us to do that. And he says, right, the denarius here would be the happiness through the work. So the work that we do can bring us happiness. And that is what represents the denarius. And the question that Aliyu brings here, the reflection is, why a denarius? Why just one denarius? And the reflection here is because there's only one happiness. It's untransferable and it is individual. I cannot, give my happiness to others. I can't take my happiness, split it in half, and give it to somebody else. It's mine, and it's one. I can't count two happinesses. What changes in happiness is how long I feel it for. And that is something that we achieve the more we evolve. The more we evolve, the more long-lasting will be our happiness. It will prevail a little bit longer. And then also through the passage, it comes to that time when the invitation says that we will pay them whatever is right, meaning whatever is just, meaning one denarius. So any work that we do to evolve ourselves, to improve our morals, no matter how short, no matter how long, every work that is truly done to fulfill our existential purpose, like we talked before, that existential actions. Any work that we do towards that is deserving of a denarius, is deserving of happiness. Every single one of them. And then he said, this is when the worker who worked the longest, this is where they start to get a little bit fussy. And they said, you have made them equal to us. You have made others equal to me. I worked for 10 hours, they worked for 1 hour, and you're calling us equal. So this is a great invitation for reflection today. How do I see others? Do I see others as my brothers and my sisters? Or do I see others as somebody that I'm competing with? And competition is, comparison, can't be something that can tarnish our own evolution. And without extending too much about this, we can go back to John when he tells us, when Jesus tells Peter, what is that to you? Follow me. So this is when Peter is trying to poke Jesus to get him to tell who was going to betray Jesus. Peter is trying to get Jesus to tell him, so who's going to betray you? Which out of us, of the apostles, will betray you? And Jesus say, what is that to you? What does that matter to you? You follow me. Right? Your purpose is to follow Jesus, regardless of what others are doing. Your focus, your purpose is to follow Jesus. And this parable is very important for us to understand comparison, and for us to reflect about comparison, as we'll see a little bit more. When they say, right next to it, right? How can you make us equal if I have borne the burden of the work and the heat of the day? So this is a great reflection about our work. How is our work towards our morals, towards improving ourselves? Do I see that as a burden? Am I tired from working on myself or not? And this is a reflection, because the good work, the true work, meaning the work utilizing the divine laws, those are not a burden. They're not heavy. On the contrary, because they improve our morals, they will constantly make us lighter, make our evolution smoother. So if we're feeling the burden of working on ourselves, that's because we're not truly working on ourselves. We are likely still working on ourselves from a place of hate, from a place of guilt, as opposed to working on ourselves from a place of love. Consoling ourselves, accepting ourselves, and peacefully working to improve ourselves. Then it's definitely not a burden. So you can work, for example, here 10 hours and work for an hour. But if that work for 1 hour was truthful, that work for an hour was more effective than 10 hours of work that weren't done truthfully. And so when they say, but he answered one of them, I am not being unfair to you, friend. Didn't you agree to work for a denarius? Take your pay and go. And Jesus, a few times, he's told us this, Sin, for example, in the parable that we just talked, in the passage we just talked about casting the stone, at the end he said to the lady, go and sin no more. Here he's saying, take your pay and go. Also he said, stand up and go. A lot of times Jesus has made this reference, to stand up and go. What does it mean to go? Go where? Right? And that's the reflection that we can make, is to go inside. Take your pay. Take what you've learned here and take that inside. Bring that inside and transform ourselves based on that learning. Taking that experience and bringing it to our hearts. For the kingdom of heaven is like a landowner who went out early in the morning to hire workers for his vineyard. The kingdom of heaven, like we talked about before, is everything that's available to us to improve ourselves. Am I utilizing the opportunities to improve, or am I going about my life without reflecting, without bringing teachings into myself? And if we keep going, he talked about the agreement that we made when he's starting to complain about him just getting a denarius. He says, didn't you agree to work for a denarius? So why are you fussing about it? You agreed to it. So why do you want more now? And the reflection here is that the contract is between myself and me. The contract that we make in every experience that we go through life is between myself and me. If I'm going, and the reflection that we can make here is when we start coming to our incarnation, when we think about, when we plan our incarnation, we've already agreed to many things. And now we're being tested. Am I going to exert and practice my resignation, my acceptance? Am I going to utilize my experiences to learn, to love, instead of refuting and asking, refuting against God or rebelling against that experience, as opposed to applying resignation, applying love, and accepting that the experiences that we go through, they have the ultimate purpose of making us better. And the beautiful explanation around the denarius here is that the denarius is always there for us. The happiness that we can extract from everything that we go through is always there. God is always giving us a denarius. And as we can see here, this worker, for example, the one that worked 10 hours, he got the denarius. God was giving him the happiness, but he couldn't enjoy it. He couldn't accept it. He couldn't see it. So when we pray that God gives us the strength to go through these trials and expiations, we're asking that God helps us also to have the eyes to see and the ears to hear, to be able to see the happiness that God is offering us, to be able to accept it and bring it into our lives. Whereas a lot of times, through the comparison of others, right, we cannot even enjoy our own happiness because we're looking at others. How happy is he? How happy is her? What do they have that I don't? As opposed to focusing on the happiness that God is offering me today. So this is a really important reflection, and it's really neat to see it in a parable. How, again, God is constantly offering us a denarius. He's constantly offering us an opportunity to feel happiness. But a lot of times we choose to turn away from it. We choose to ignore it because we're so busy looking at others, comparing others to ourselves. Where the one that we should be inspired from is Jesus himself. That is the one that we should be, that we are invited to mirror and use as our model and guide. And so to end, talking a little bit more about happiness, if we think of a denarius as this little smiley face, if we can picture, an experience that we're going through right now, and we can picture in our minds God giving us this smiley face, so we can remind ourselves that we can think of it as an experience that I'm going through at this very moment. We can think about globally, even a pandemic that we're going through now. And every time God is giving us this token, this smiley face, can we see it? Can we enjoy it? Can we extract the happiness from our experiences? Or are we still utilizing our time to look at how many tokens the others have gotten? Whether we have worked 1, 2, 10 hours, God will always give us that token. He will always give us that coin. And if I still can't see it, it's a great invitation for us to dive even deeper into the divine laws. Something that Spiritism can help us immensely is understanding. Understanding what we go through, understanding the immortal spirit. Because that can truly help us open our eyes to see that happiness that God gives us. So this is all that I wanted to bring. And again, reminding everybody that tomorrow we will have our meeting at 7 p.m., our public meeting. And we will be talking about the importance of the Spiritist Center in our lives. And so hope to see you here tomorrow at 7 p.m. And if you can, please, we strongly encourage everybody to bring a mask and be here with us. And again, following provincial guidelines, if you aren't vaccinated, we would kindly ask you that you follow our meeting online. And so, since there are no more questions, I'd like to end in a quick prayer and hope to see you here tomorrow. So let us close our eyes and picture this smiley face that you're seeing on the screen. And connect with Jesus, with our guardian angels, and tell them, please help me see this token of happiness that God is giving me today. Help me understand what this experience I'm going through now brings to me, to my family, to my friends. Help me, God, have the eyes to see and the ears to listen to you through all the experiences that we go through. May we find that our burden is easy, is getting lighter, and we can start to see the divine light, the happiness, these tokens that God gives us, more and more, so happiness can prevail in our soul. Thank you for one more day of communion with you, and may we meet again tomorrow to talk about the importance of the Spiritist Center in our lives. Thank you, and so be it. So thank you all, and I hope to see you tomorrow. Have a wonderful Sunday. Bye-bye.